Okay. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the online global conference, Dreaming the New Earth, Co-Creating the Sovereign, Resilient Humanity of the Future, where we are gathering with visionaries, wisdom keepers, and practitioners from around the world and from a variety of fields of expertise who are in service to the global awakening of consciousness and to supporting people and our planet during these times of great change. During this time together, we will tune into the potent wisdom and experiences they will be offering, which will serve as guidance for us to ground our personal and our collective vision of the new earth. We will learn about the significance of these times of prophecy we're in, come to feel a deeper sense of community, belonging, and interconnection with all our relations, as well as learn how we can trust our own inner wisdom and gain insight into how to heal that which may be holding us back from walking our true path, individually and as a collective, a path that supports and protects the continuance of life. I'm your host and the creator of this event, Clara Nisiri, and I'm really excited to present Michael Meade. Michael Meade, DHL, is a renowned storyteller, author, and scholar of mythology, anthropology, and psychology. He combines hypnotic storytelling, street-savvy perceptiveness, and spell-binding interpretations of ancient myths with a deep knowledge of cross-cultural rituals. He has an unusual ability to distill and synthesize these disciplines, tapping into ancestral sources of wisdom and connecting them to the stories we are living today. Michael is the author of Awakening the Soul, The Genius Myth, Fate and Destiny, The Two Agreements of the Soul, Why the World Doesn't End, The Water of Life, Initiation, and the Tempering of the Soul. He is editor with James Hillman and Robert Bly of Rag and Bone Shop of the Heart, and the creator of the Living Myth podcast. Michael Meade is the founder of Mosaic Multicultural Foundation, a nonprofit network of artists, activists, and community builders that encourages greater understanding between diverse peoples. Thank you so much for being here, Michael. It's an honor and a joy to have you be part of this event.
Really good to be with you, Clara.
Thank you. It's great to have your voice join this conversation on some topics that are really relevant for the times that we're in. And the title of what you'll be sharing with us today is A Time of Transformation on Earth. Yes, indeed. I'm looking forward to diving into this with you. We're really in the midst of radical change in the world, a world in crisis on so many fronts. And so many are truly feeling the chaos and uncertainty that this comes with. You often speak of it as humanity being in a collective rite of passage, which doesn't come around very often, the collective nature of it. And so many people are feeling a strong call to change certain things in their lives. Would you share with us your thoughts on that?
So the way I've been thinking about it is it's a period of radical transformation, and the kind of archetypal style for doing that over many, many years in many, many places has been a rite of passage. And simply put, a rite of passage means that a person separates from what they knew, often from who they knew, and in a sense suffers a little bit of death. There's a loss and a kind of a death and a kind of a descent into the middle stage of the rite of passage, which is referred to as liminal phase or liminality, which means betwixt and between, neither one thing yet nor the other, which means that's the place where the transformation occurs. And then the rite of passage is completed when a person or the group returns at a different level of understanding and a different really level of being. So the first step is separation, which includes and feels like a little bit of death. The second step is betwixt and between, uncertainty, darkness, chaos, but also transformation, awakening, revelation. And then the third step is returning to, and you have to say, I don't know, to the culture in some sense, or the community, with a a renewed life and an altered life, which then is typically recognized by the rest of the community and somewhat blessed by the rest of the community. So that is the ancient way that people imagined transformation and change on a both individual and collective level. So that to me is like an archetypal thing that our psyche, are in the deep sense of the soul, our psyche understands that process. And one reason to pay attention to the process is because right now we are in, as you said, the chaos of the liminal condition and the liminal position. The world that we used to think we had is gone and it's not coming back. And the world that everybody wants to be in is only partially visible or visionable. We're in that place where darkness has to be tolerated. The step before knowing something is not knowing. You know, in order to know something, we have to acknowledge what we don't know. And right now, we don't know how to proceed. And all of the previous ideas about a strategic plan and so on kind of go out the window and things become chaotic. Now, one other thing I would add, in creation myths around the world almost always begin with chaos, darkness, chaos, being unseen, and life is not pronounced yet. And then creation comes out of chaos. So on a mythological level, you could say the chaos we're experiencing can be understood as the step before the creation we want to be part of. So that's some of the archetypal, psychological, mythological material that at least helps me have a sense of where we are.
Mm-hmm. And in this context where you mentioned the world that we want to see is just partly visible now. What are we seeing, and how do we get to that world? And this is a very broad question, but how do we get to that world that we're only partly seeing? And linked to that, I would love to ask you about genius, the way you speak of genius, and how we can, yeah, how this is connected to bring into the world our destiny, how it's connected to that.
So one way I would approach it is not so much how do we get there, that's our usual method of moving. How does it get to us? So this comes back to something that you mentioned, which is the meaning of prophecy. So in my education and growing up, prophecy has always been used to mean prediction of the future. But the word prophecy actually means something like going so deep into the river of time that visions and messages come from the source and the ancient beginning, as well as from the future and the so far unknown, and also from the present. So a genuine prophet is becoming a vehicle for messages from the ancient past, which would include the beginning of life and the source of life, as well as eruptions of knowledge and imagination from the present, as well as visions coming from the future. So that helps me. And it also helps make the shift to the place, in a sense, the willingness to accept not knowing and the capacity to become a more open vessel that can receive lost or necessary knowledge from the past as well as from the future. I don't know if that helps, but that's how I'm seeing it. And because in mythological terms, creation is not something that happened back there, and now we're in the aftermath. Creation is the ongoing transformative energy of the earth, of the and of the cosmos, for that matter. The cosmos is constantly recreating itself. So is the earth. Forests, the trees, the big trees in the forest collapse, and out of their collapsing, dying bodies comes the next forest. We are living in the midst of recreation, but we have been taught to think that it happened back there, and we might be coming to the end of the whole thing. But in creation mythology, in rite of passage stuff, the end is the beginning. The end has a thread that leads to the beginning. So it's as if we have to re-educate ourselves mythologically, I think psychologically as well, and cosmologically, in order to tolerate the amount of chaos that's going to continue and the amount of uncertainty that is increasing for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And linked to that, as I was saying,
Yeah.
you speak about genius.
So for years, for decades, we've done work with at-risk youth, homeless kids, street kids, gang kids, young people really in trouble, suicidal kids. And in the course of that, it would become evident that I may be able to work with a young woman, a young guy on a given day, but by the time I come back to that neighborhood, they may be dead. That's what we have been experiencing for many years. So how do I talk to a young person who has been educated to think they're empty inside, and who doesn't fit into society and knows it? How do I talk to them in a way that is meaningful to them and meaningful in itself? And I landed on the word genius, which is a Latin word that doesn't mean high IQ or specific talent. It means the spirit that is already there. That's the origin of the word genius. And so that suggests that each person has a spirit that was already there when they were born. That spirit turns out to be the guide to their own life. It turns out to be the spirit companion. It turns out to be the guardian angel. It turns out to be that little voice that speaks just when you need some advice. And it turns out to be the carrier of the complex arrangement of gifts, capacities, and style that exist in each person. And so part of what we began doing with young people is helping them to see they already have a genius. They don't simply have to make something of themselves. They have to awaken to who they already are, which includes their own unique genius way of being alive. And so go back to what we were talking about in rites of passage or times of transformation. The key thing is awakening to who we already are at the core of ourself. That's the key issue. It always has been the key issue. But in the modern world, modern ideas like the accidental universe and socialistic ideas of various kinds have led people to think they're empty inside, which can be the source of tremendous depression and despair and deep uncertainty. Knowing that there's something inside that knows better than we do who we are is a completely different experience. And it means learning to trust that something inside can awaken in critical moments and help us find our way. I'm saying that that's the basis on the individual life, but it's also the basis of collective transformation. People are not going to agree on a certain idea. People are not going to agree on a certain belief system. What happens is, if enough people awaken to their inner genius and begin to find a way, because all the genius things involve giving gifts, giving the gifts that are in the heart and in the soul. If enough people do that, then all the things that are wrong in nature, all the things that are wrong in society begin to be approached from the place of genius. And all of a sudden, without anybody having to agree with everyone else, people are doing genius things, and healing is happening, and creativity is happening, and visioning is happening.
And it's in those times of chaos that journey within is so important, right? It's looking within rather than what's external to us.
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue has always been the challenge to become oneself in the midst of a world that may not be encouraging. That's always been the human challenge. It's just that it got really confused, and many modern people accepted the idea of the empty soul, the blank slate, that you come into the world blank. And then what your family does and what the community does and your experiences write on you, and you become the sum of those things written on you. But throughout the world, universally, before modern times, everyone's stories, at least every culture I've been able to study, always assumed that everyone was coming in as a unique soul being born into the world and bringing their own genius gifts to the world. The modern world is really based on consuming. And so you have consumption. Well, consumption is only going to lead to one place. Everything gets consumed. But the ancient world was built upon knowing that you were gifted and then learning how to give your gifts. And giving one's gifts turns out to be a stabilizing, realizing experience for people. And you can be in uncertainty, and you can be in dramatic, challenging circumstances, and giving your gifts creates stability even in those kind of situations.
Mm-hmm. So some might be wondering, how do we identify our genius, and how can we go about making it more conscious? What sort of things would we look out for?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. So one thing that's helpful, usually your friends know something about your genius. Usually, and I've done this working with young people where their friend has committed suicide. And so then we're trying to work and keep them from committing suicide because it can be contagious. And it's based on not knowing that you're here for a reason, typically. And so getting them to talk about their friends' capacities and gifts, which they can do in a moment, then can change to, let's talk about yours now. Let's talk about each other's. So people that know the ways in which you're gifted. And it's not simply gifts, it's also a style, because many people can play the guitar, but certain people, as soon as you hear two chords, you know who it is. That's because the genius is unique for each person. The talent may be similar, but the genius is the unique part. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is exactly the opposite. Go back over your life and look at when things have gone really wrong, when you've been in really big trouble or experienced a really big loss. How did you recover from that? And if you really examine that, often you find some of the genius qualities were there in recovery or in a dramatic situation. So this comes to my mind, so I'll say it. This is how I learned about these things. I was 13 and a half years old, and I was growing up in New York City, and I was in what we call the crew, which is like a junior gang. And older guys were in the older gangs, and that's how it went at that time. And in odd circumstances, I got cornered in the bathroom of the local movie theater by a gang that was of guys older than me. And someone in our crew that were younger had offended them, not me, but I was the one that was available. And I was cornered in this bathroom, thrown onto the floor, and they had pulled out their knives and they were about to carve me up. And they were known for doing that. So it was a genuine, felt like life and death to me. And at the time, I didn't know what happened, but when I look back on it, my ego departed. Like, I'm not hanging around from this. This looks really painful. I'm getting out of here. And then what happened is, from somewhere inside me, unbeknownst to me that it was there, or that at its own knowledge, a voice began to tell a story. I mean, the reason I remember this is someone asked me, when did you become a storyteller? And I did by laying on the floor in this bathroom at 13 and a half years old, thinking I'm about to be carved up. And all of a sudden, inside me, a voice with no rehearsal, no invitation, no preparation starts telling a story. And I just watched their eyes change and the knives go down. They got totally compelled by the story, and they never hurt me at all. And so at that moment, I knew there was something inside me that was part of me, but not exactly, and that knew better than I how to handle things. And I didn't know at the time that you would call that genius, but that's how I learned about it. So if people examine like life and death circumstances, or things that felt like life and death, often it's right there. It's right there because it is essential to us, and it takes the opportunity, dramatic opportunities, to present itself. So it's not an easy thing to figure out, but it's a really worthwhile thing to struggle with.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show how important it is that we go on that journey, right? And heed that call at no matter what age, and no matter how many struggles or blockages one might feel are in the way. What would you say to those who might be thinking, well, it's a bit late now, or life is full of obstacles?
I have a saying, The calling keeps calling. It is so important to the individual human soul to be called and to answer the call. It is so essential that it keeps calling right till the end of time for that person. And the calling is calling to the genius. That's what it is. The calling is calling to this thing that is pre-seeded in us, pre-sown within us. Like I wound up being a storyteller. It took me another 20 years to become a storyteller, but it was there. It was there before that day. It pronounced itself on that day. And then I had to fight through all the usual family expectations, educational things, everything that was in the way, really, to finally start realizing I had to tell stories, which I'm still doing. And that saved my life. And in a way, it is my life. If that hadn't happened then, it could be happening now. The calling keeps calling because it is definitive of the life path of that person, and each person is unique and each person has some genius. And that's how we might get out of this whole thing, because in a rite of passage, that middle ground of the liminal uncertainty betwixt and between is where two things would happen. A person would hopefully, with some help, with a vision and whatever elements might happen, would awaken to their inner genius, their sense of the shape and meaning of their soul. And the second thing that would happen is some healing would begin, because everyone gets wounded early in life. And so the youthful young, the rite of passage for young women, for young men, was really to do those two things. The idea of fitting into culture might come later. The idea of fitting into oneself, that was the rite of passage. And that meant awakening to the inner genius, and it also meant beginning healing from early wounds. So right now, as we live in the chaos of modern circumstance, we need the genius. We all need a better sense that I already am in someone meaningful inside myself. I'm here to give something. I have value within me. And secondarily, all the chaos in the world makes everybody's inner wounds more activated. And so we all need more healing now. But as in a rite of passage, this is the opportunity for both awakening and for healing.
Amazing. And that leads me to the importance of community. And you mentioned, friends, asking friends what for pointers to what our genius could be. And you also mentioned family and expectations and all of that. And I know it's quite an important thing to surround oneself with those who are on the same path or a similar path, some way to find courage, which at the same time then connects us to the importance of the relationship with the earth. But would you share a bit on community, and then perhaps we could move on to speaking of our connection with the earth as well?
So the idea and the imagination of genius is interesting because it allows the relationship between the individual and the community to become more visible. If each person is a unique soul with an inner genius that has something to contribute to the community, with gifts that need to be given, then the individual needs the community to give their gifts, and the community is waiting for the benefit of the genius and the gifts of the individual. They work hand in hand. So then the role of the community becomes partially encouraging and sustaining the genius, the imagination, the soul of each individual. And then part of the individual is to keep finding community connections where they can give their gifts and help establish presence and meaning in the world. And so there's a dynamic there that is really important, and each part is important to the other. When the world becomes chaotic the way it is now, it's very hard to have consistent community. And of course, community doesn't mean living near each other. That's neighborhood. But community comes from the Latin also, communitas. And it means something so deep happens that it pulls everyone together, whether they agree or not. It pulls everybody into the depth and the unity of humanity. That's community. Community has to have a root into humanity, into the earth, in a sense, into the ground of humanity, just the way a tree has to have a root into the earth. And so the individual becomes the spark and the imagination of the community, and the community becomes the ground in which the individual finds stability and acceptance and can grow their genius, something like that. And so since it's chaotic now, I think it's hard to find a community. And the end of the rite of passage is a return to community. Well, most people will say, well, we don't have community. Where are we returning to? So I work with an idea that I call sudden community. And it's close to what you were saying. People come together because of pain, or because of a particular wound, or a kind of rejection, or people come together because they're longing to have community. And you can establish community rather quickly. And it doesn't mean you're going to live together forever. It means you get into that interconnection of communitas, which also connects everybody to the earth. And then it's gone. And then you have to find it again. So I think in terms of immediate genius and sudden community.
Mm-hmm. There's a quote from your book, Awakening the Soul. See where I've got it. Here it is. That says, only years later did I find the clarifying idea that what truly awakens our souls will take us much further down a path than we would choose to go on our own. Which really feels like it speaks to the idea of that calling that is so strong. Once we become aware of it, there's no turning back, really, because the soul so wants that awakening. Could you elaborate a little more on what it means to awaken the soul? What do you mean by that?
So when I'm saying awakening the soul, I'm referring to the idea I already described, that is, each soul is unique. Each person is unique. If a person doesn't live their actual life, no one else will ever live it. It just won't happen. We have one chance at this, in a sense, and we're each on this kind of a radical expedition to become ourselves. The thing which we're trying to become is in us. That's why I call it awakening the soul. And we're trying to awaken. And so it doesn't fit into modern rational theory, right? It's much more, the soul is the connective tissue of life. And it's also the source of imagination and beauty and things of that kind. And so you can't nail it down. But so awakening the soul would mean, first of all, recognizing something about who I am and how I'm made inside. And so that means that has to come from a very, very deep place. And it's usually a place that exists below the zone of trauma and fear and woundedness, if that makes sense. So in rites of passage, after the separation occurs, there is a descent. You go down, because what's trying to be found is deep inside. And so in many kinds of rites of passage, the young people would be individually put a vision quest all by themselves out in nature, or all by themselves in a dark hut out in nature. There's many ways that they do it. And the idea is to enter this kind of stillness and separateness, and then descend. And that descent goes through all kinds of emotions, which are, in a strange way, the awakening energies. In other words, when a person feels sorrow and they allow themselves, or grief and they allow themselves to feel it, they're actually more awake, and they're closer to their soul when they're in that kind of deep emotion. And the same thing then happens. Dreams, interestingly enough, become part of awakening. You have to go to sleep to get a dream, but the dream, when you understand it, wakes you up. Something is trying to come to our attention, and when it does, we awaken. And in initiation rituals, which are another type of rite of passage, there's the idea that there's two sets of eyes. And when we're born, our little eyes open, we see the soul, and we see our big parents and all that kind of thing that the infant sees. And that's important. And it's important to, to have that kind of sight, which I wouldn't exactly call vision. But at a critical time in our lives, there's an inner set of eyes, the eyes that are in the soul, or the eyes that are in the heart, in native traditional called Kantaista, the eyes of the heart that open, and then you have vision, not just sight. And so when the eyes open, there's an awakening to the soul, and the soul of each person has its own way of seeing the world. Another way that I say it is each soul has its own worldview. And that worldview is beyond measure important for that person. Because those inner eyes, when they open, are not just receiving the world, they will walk us through the world, or they will help us find the path of meaning, the path of heart, the path of further awakening.
Much of your work revolves around mythology, as we know, and our ancient mythology can be such a fascinating resource to navigate significant moments such as this journey of transformation that we're on, and finding perhaps our own personal mythology. How did it all begin for you with mythology and understanding and interpreting myths?
Okay, so the same year, 6 months before I'm trapped by the gang in the bathroom of the movie theater, on my 13th birthday, well, so I came from a poor family, and so when my mother, just before my birthday, asked what I wanted, I said I didn't want anything. Now, it wasn't true that I didn't want anything, but I had learned to say that, because when I asked for what I wanted, I didn't get it. And not only that, my parents seemed like depressed for about 2 weeks because they couldn't provide what the kids wanted. And so then I took the position of saying, I don't want anything. But my aunt said to me, what are you interested in? And I said, history. And because at 13, I was trying to figure out what the hell happened here. And history seemed like it might have the answer. And what I mean by that is, why do the neighbors all seem like they lost the dream of their life? Why is everybody living this way? Part of it was in poverty, but it wasn't just physical poverty. It was emotional, spiritual poverty. And at 13, young people have their own ideas. And so I thought maybe I should be studying history. So my aunt, a notoriously short person, went to the local bookstore and said, I need a history book. And they pointed to the top shelf of someplace. And she went over and grabbed the book and gave it to them. They wrapped it up. She brought it and gave it to me on my birthday. I ripped the cover off, and she said, oh, no, it's the wrong book. It's not, give it back. It's the wrong book. I'll take it back. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, no, I want this book. And she's saying, but it's the wrong book. And I'm looking at it. And the cover of the book has a guy riding on a horse that's clearly flying in the sky. And he's just shot an arrow that's arcing back this way. And I'm just blown away by the image. I want the book. And so finally I ripped the rest of the cover off, and it says Mythology by Edith Hamilton. So on my 13th birthday, I got the right, wrong, gift, mistaken, everything, all of that. That's how things go sometimes. It was right, but it was wrong. And something in me saw right away. That night, I read almost the entire book. And at 13, I went from being a kid that was really confused about what was going on and didn't feel comfortable with my family or my neighborhood. I was suddenly in a world that made sense. And I didn't have to qualify. I didn't have to become bigger or richer or smarter. I was just there. It was like a door opened. And I found this other world, which turns out to be what the Irish, my family comes from Ireland on both sides, what the Irish simply called the other world, which all ancient cultures understood. We live in two worlds: the practical, measurable world, and the immeasurable world from which all meaningful things come. And that night I had it. I had the book opened like a doorway open. I was not just reading, I was walking inside these ancient stories. And so it took me many years to learn how to live with that. But that was the beginning of mythology for me. And from the beginning, it seemed way more wise than anything I was learning in school or church or listening to older people.
Amazing. And another beautiful story. Thank you. And how can people learn to interpret myths and use them as a resource for their own journey? Like, for example, in your case, perhaps even create their own new personal mythology as we navigate this time of great renewal.
So one thing I learned was everyone responds to a story from their own life. If I'm telling a story and I mention in the story there's a dog in the story, and there's a bunch of people listening to the story, some will see a poodle, and someone will see a dachshund, and someone will see a mutt, and someone will see, every kind of, every kind of dog will be in the room, because people respond to a story with their own life. And so the way myth works is it gives us a territory to enter, a narrative territory, and we meet it with our life. And so when I tell stories, that's what I always ask everyone: what struck you in the story? And if we had to find you in the story, where would you be? And what happens then is a person begins to realize that their own inner life includes a plot line that's trying to unfold into a unique story. And that myths are there to help us understand, oh, that kind of symbolism, that kind of archetypal imagery connects to me here. So that when I'll tell a story and people are really getting their own reactions, and if they can stay with their response, which is always an imagination, they have a doorway into their own story. And so it's easy to demonstrate. It's hard to talk about it on Zoom, but it's easy to demonstrate with people, because people just have their own reactions, and they're reacting from a story that's already happening. Now, most people are now aware of loops of story that happen inside them, that are usually loops of trauma and self-mistreatment and all kinds of things. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the deeper story, the story that's in the soul. And so, since we've been using my life experience as a kind of a narrative, from the moment of receiving that book at 13, 16, 6 months later, being in a life and death circumstance where now the story comes out of me, and then becoming a storyteller, you can see how the story in a person's life is there in seed, like the seed of a tree that's trying to grow. And then through both positive and negative experiences, the story tries to unfold. And we have been told not to pay attention to that, and that's too bad. But if we pay attention to it, you start to realize this is the myth I'm in. And I can recognize it because I can see it in mythic form. The myths are, someone wants to find a myth as a series of lies that reveals the truth. So a myth isn't like a belief system at all. It's a bunch of symbolic connections and images that allow people to put themselves into larger circumstances where they can see how their unique life connects to the universal aspects of all of life.
Mm-hmm. There's such a beautiful golden thread that just highlights all these different, very important moments, like the ones you've just shared. On a different note, you sometimes share about the etymology of words and their true meaning or their original meaning. And I wonder sometimes how different things could be if we brought back those original meanings of certain words. For example, I've heard you speak of the word fear, for example, and apocalypse. Would you share a little about that with us?
Yeah, thank you. So my interest in myth at a young age became also an interest in language, because each word is like a living story. And myth itself, now in common language, myth means something patently not true. It's just a myth. That's what's happened because of the exaggerated logic of the contemporary world. But myth, the original meaning of myth, it comes from the Greek mythos, which means to know the story and to tell the story, but it also can mean emergent truth. So a word that used to mean emergent truth now means completely false. So words have their own life history. And so one of the words that has gotten lost in terms of understanding it is another Greek word, apocalypse. The Greek term is actually apocalypsis. And in the modern world, and it's a very popular idea in the modern world because everybody sees things falling apart. And not only that, right now, the world seems to be on fire as well. And apocalypse that got interpreted through the last book of the Bible, which was called Apocalypse, that was a particular vision of the fiery end of things. So most people think apocalypse means the fiery end of things, or the zombie apocalypse, which means the everybody becomes the Walking Dead or something. The word apocalypse, ancient Greek, apocalypsis, it has two major meanings. One is lift the veil, that a veil is lifted and we begin to see with those deeper eyes what's really going on. And that's happening in the world now. You can see a lot of things that used to be hidden. But the other meaning of apocalypse is collapse, renewal. In other words, it's a story of collapse and renewal. And only the collapse part became popular or became known. The renewal part is the part we all really want and need. The collapse is okay. That's taking care of itself. That's happening every day. So apocalypse in Greek language moves to another word called apocastasis, which means renewal, restoration, and rebuilding of the world. And so are we in apocalyptic times? Yes, but in both ways. Everything is collapsing, and secretly everything is trying to renew. And we are here, in a sense, to be witnesses of the collapse and agents helping the renewal, if that makes sense. And you asked about another word, but I'm so taken with apocalypse, I forgot the other word. It's a collapse of my imagination, but go ahead. What was the other word?
The other one I mentioned was fear, for example.
Oh, yeah. So fear, of course, is very dominant now. Fear is very collective fear, as a matter of fact. Not only do people have their own fear, but now everybody has collective fear because people think the world is ending, because the institutions are rattling, because there's so much conflict. There's increasing amounts of fear. And it's another word that has a completely different origin from what we think. Most people think of fear as, heightened anxiety, shaking, bordering on terror. That's not fear. That's the result of not responding to fear. Fear comes from the old English word fair, or the same root as fair, as in thoroughfare. And fear means to go through it. So when we first feel fear, it's an understanding or an acknowledgement of the mind and the body that we're about to go through something. That's the beginning of fear. And if we allow the fear to be present and we don't tighten up, then fear becomes our connection to instincts and intuitions. And we learn how to move instinctively and intuit the ways to go rather than becoming paralyzed. Is that helpful? It's the same thing as apocalypse. It's that if we understood both parts of it, then we don't become afraid of fear. Most people now are fearful of being afraid. And then also because modern world tends to pull people away from their instincts and intuitions into always trying to think their way through things. Most people are not as fully in their body as they could be, and the body knows a lot of things. It also knows what scares us. But if we can be more connected to the body and more present with emotions, then fear, they used to say fear is the guide. Fear is the guide. It tells us where we're going anyway. And then if we don't restrict ourselves, then fear gives us access to the intelligence of intuition and to the strength and courage of instinct. So that's etymology.
Amazing. How such a different perspective, isn't it? To actually look at the real meaning of words. The subjects of transhumanism and AI. These are really big topics these days. What role do you see them playing?
Well, I'm mostly troubled by it. I mostly think it's an extension of the attempt to solve things through technology that need to be solved through spirit and soul. I think it's there's a capacity to do it, and I think its own etymology is instructive, right? Because it means artificial. It starts out with the word artificial, not the word art, not the word authentic. It starts out with artificial, and so it means a kind of intelligence that is imitative rather than creative. So I think on all kinds of levels, it's a problematic thing. Now, it's also here. It's not going to go away. So then there is a process of figuring out what to do. I mean, probably what we're doing on Zoom right now has some kind of an AI function or component somewhere. It's already worked its way in. So it's going to be with us. My hope is that over time, people will realize that it has a limited value and realize where it can be used, like some good technology, some other technology that is good. I recently had cataract surgery, the best medical experience I've ever had by far. And they simply take out the lens that has become worn and is blocking light, and they stick another lens in there. It happens very fast. It's painless, and all of a sudden you have your sight back. Not only that, you have like a greater capacity for vision. So later in life, you're not seeing a dark world, you're seeing the bright world again. So far, I'm really liking that. And so maybe AI will have some uses that make the world brighter and make life sustainable. But it's in danger of becoming something that makes people less alive. And that's my concern.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. And on this note, one of the themes of this event is sovereignty. What does sovereignty mean to you in this context and in all of what you've shared?
Yeah, I was intrigued by that word being there. It's a very old word, and it my recollection of the meaning of it, it means to be centered in a proper way. It doesn't mean power over; it means presence with. And so I would take, for me, sovereignty moves to nobility. It has a connection to nobility. And there's an old idea that every soul is noble in its essence, that we are born with nobility, and we try to awaken to it and make it a conscious thing. And I think sovereignty is similar. It also seems to me to have something to do with dwelling at the center of oneself, because the sovereign place would be the center of the realm when people had historical sovereigns, which could be queens or kings, but they were at the center of the realm. And so it seems to me that sovereignty for a human means to dwell at the center of oneself, to be connected to the essence of one's life, and to therefore be in a sovereign, soulful condition. It doesn't mean, I don't think, being sovereign over other people. So it makes me think of the etymology of another word, which is ambit. So in the modern world, people are taught to be ambitious and go as far as you can go and try to be the best in the world and all kinds of things like that, which the soul kind of is in question about. But the word ambition comes from ambit, and the word ambit means to walk the circumference of the realm. That we're supposed to, throughout our lives, be it psychologically or in terms of vision and imagination, to walk the ambit of our realm, and hopefully to see that it's getting bigger, that we're each here to live a big life. Doesn't mean a loud life, and it doesn't mean that some people aren't quite introverted. It just means that the soul is intended to be growing bigger and bigger. And so that's a real ambition. And I think that would be connected to a sovereignty at the center that is connected to the expansion of the soul at the edges.
Beautiful. We're coming to close to the end of our time together. You touched on the subject of dreams earlier, and I would love to hear from your experience the role of dreams and how they've been important in your journey.
So dreams and visions are natural functions of the soul. And so we were talking about rites of passage, and one of the most familiar forms is a vision quest. And so in that situation, you're going out into nature and separating from everything else in order to gain a vision, which is like letting the future come to you, or letting some vision of your connection to nature, the earth, the world come to you. So that's that aspect of it. Dreams are another kind of vision where, there's so many great ways to talk about it. Native American tradition there's more than one soul. So you have the body soul, which is, animating us when we're awake. And then when we go to sleep, the body soul is what's going to sleep. And then the dream soul awakens. When we go to sleep, the dream soul awakens. I found a tribe in South America along the Amazon River. I've never been there, but I studied the writings about them and the things that they say. And in their imagination, which I really love, they say when you fall asleep at night, your dream soul goes to the center of the cosmos. And at the center of the cosmos, it gets a message, which then is brought back to you. And when you awaken and remember the dream, you're remembering a message from the center of the cosmos. That's one of the most beautiful ideas I've ever encountered. And then someone right away said to me, well, wait a minute. I just had this dream where this girl in the 3rd grade was in the middle of it and this was happening. You mean that coming from the center of the cosmos? So I like that question. But what it means is the message from the center of the cosmos can only speak to us in terms of our own life. So in our own life, something is going on, and the message coming from the origin of life, from the source of life, from the cosmos center, whatever you want to call it, the message trying to get to us from the other world, from the source of life, has to be interpreted through experiences in our own life. And so that's one way to work with dreams, to imagine that something that's so essential, that's connected to the source of creation, is actually speaking to us. But we have to decipher the language. We have to learn the language of our own dreams. And that includes usually the language of our nightmares, as well as the language of our revelatory experiences. And there's a Native American story I work with, that the first people, the people that were there at the beginning, they were the first ones on Earth, and they were placed on Earth by, and this is interesting, it's not God. They're placed there by the one who made the Earth. That's the only reference to the Creator, is the one who made the Earth. And the people don't like where they are. They're the first people, and they're going, this isn't working. And they're talking out loud. And of course, it's the beginning of time. And so the Creator is right nearby, overhearing what they're saying. And 2 things they say are, we don't rest well here, and we don't have big dreams. And so the one who made the Earth, who's still pretty close by, says, listen, if you're not having big dreams and you're not resting, well, go somewhere else. And so the first people begin to wander the Earth looking for a place where they dwell in a comfortable way, and they have big dreams. So that's just the beginning of the myth. But it says something about, because people have been wandering ever since. And you could say that our mind wanders and our psyche wanders if we're not dwelling in a meaningful way deeply enough in ourselves, and if we're not having big dreams. And people are here to have big dreams. The other world, the divine, the spirit, whatever people want to call it, is always trying to enter the worlds, and it can only enter through the people living at a given time, which means the dream of the world is trying to enter through us, the understanding of things is trying to enter through us, and even visions of the future are trying to enter through us. And one of the main avenues for vision, for life renewal, for imagination, is through dreams. And everyone dreams, even if many people don't remember them. If we stop dreaming, we die. Dreams are keeping us alive, and they're trying to help us find the path of our own lives. So that's a lot can be said about dreams, but there's some of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there've been so many wonderful pieces of wisdom. If you were to suggest one thing that our audience could take away to begin the journey of embodying and grounding what you've shared with us, what would that be?
Well, I think maybe staying with where we just were, with dreams and visions. William Blake, the great philosopher, artist, poet, once said, every day has a moment of eternity waiting for you. So the meaning is that in every 24-hour period, there's a moment which can open and connect us to the eternal, which is the spirit, the source of life, the capacity for renewal, the place of wonder. It's trying to every day find us. And one practice we could have is being more attentive to the moment when things open. and we get a touch of eternity. People are always wanting more time. More time is not the point. The eternal is the point. The timeless is the point. The timeless renews. Having more time, we usually just do the same things we were doing before. Timelessness opens us to our natural connection to the divine, to the center of the earth, and even to the center of the cosmos. Every day has a moment of eternity waiting for you.
Beautiful. Thank you. And to wrap up, what is your vision or your personal prayer for the new earth, Michael?
Oh, for the new earth. Well, wow, that's such a big thing. Well, part of my prayer for the new earth is that the earth would be seen as the source of welcoming, the source of generosity, the source of renewal, instead of the place to exploit. Part of my prayer for the earth would be that the earth is seen once again as a living entity. And I like the idea of Gaia and how Gaia has been, in a sense, the first goddess to make its way back into the modern world through the Gaia hypothesis. But I also love where Gaia comes from. And it isn't ancient Greece. It actually came from India before it got to Greece. And so maybe my prayer, if I prayed better than I usually do, would be something like the Gayatri mantra, which is the ancient prayer from the Upanishads, praying to the earth as the goddess, as the mother of life, as the source of generosity, that we all, in respecting her in a greater way, would receive the generosity and the vitality that she's trying to give to us. Just the way dreams are trying to come to us when we sleep. The energy of the earth, in my understanding, is trying to come up through our feet into our bodies, wherever we are at any given time. And so my prayer is that the earth would be respected and honored the way it should be, and that we would all become more able to receive the welcoming, the generous, and the caring energy of the earth as it tries to enter us through our feet from below.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Michael, before we go, you have a gift for our audience. Would you tell us about that, what that is?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, I'm looking at Corin over here.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, there's a link being provided, unbeknownst to me, in the generosity of the earth and other people connected to the earth, that will give people access to an event that we did about recreation in the world, about the energy of recreation in the world. So that's the gift. The other gift would be, we have a free podcast every week called Living Myth, where I talk this way about various things happening in the contemporary world or things from the ancient continuing world of myth. So that's Living Myth, and that's a gift every week. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for those generous gifts. And we'll have those links to that below the interview, as well as your website, which is everybody should check out, full of amazing resources. Thank you so much again for joining us today, Michael.
Great to be with you, and good luck to everyone in this chaotic world. Keep finding the genius, keep finding the dream, and the vision will come from there. Thank you.
Fantastic. And to all those who have joined us today, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you at the next session of this online gathering. Thank you and many blessings.